I don't know if we have Melinda in the chat, but I just want to welcome. Okay, yes, here she is. So Melinda is the co-chair of the working group number 4, and I'm the other co-chair. She wasn't able to be here yesterday, so I would like to welcome you to the third day, the final one. And Melinda, can you hear us? No sound. So we'll work on that. Um, I I just thought it was a good opportunity to have her also introduce herself. Here we are going to be in this first session called Out of the Box, Innovation and Data for Children on the Move. We're going to be hearing from 5 different panelists um, on different approaches to data technology, to new ways of thinking on data, and how can it generate value. I don't know if do we have Melinda back? You can hear us now. Okay, Melinda, over to you first, and then I'll introduce the panel.
Thanks, Manuel. Yeah, I only heard that last bit. I hope you can hear me well. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, I'll really quickly introduce. It is such a privilege to be able to join online. My name is Melinda van Zyl, and I am co-chairing the 4th working group in IDAC, along with Manuel. I am the global lead for Save the Children's International Migration and Displacement Initiative. So it is fantastic, it's exciting, it's important, I think, for IDAC at this moment in time to have a focus on innovative data solutions, high tech, low tech, digital, whichever. But I think at this time in the world where we see an unprecedented scale of displacement and mobility, but we also see advances in technology beyond anything that we could have imagined 5 years ago, where we were working with data or indicators for children on the move. It is so important that we are able to convene and speak about this today. So I really look forward to hearing from the panel and also hearing from the room. Thank you, Manuel.
Thank you, Melinda. And I'm equally excited, first, that IDAC has this focus on innovation, as Melinda was saying, looking at the amazing changes we're seeing in the power of AI, for example, just to name one, and how can we begin thinking differently? What is the value that we can take in there? What are the new risks that emerge from this new reality for migration and children on the move? And for that, I'm so excited to have this panel here of 5 amazing panelists, each of them thinking differently on out of the box. How can a new thinking on data techniques, data technologies, and we will look to hear from them on what are the opportunities that emerge, what are the challenges also behind that. So with that, we are hoping to hear a little bit from each one of them on the different projects that they've been doing, like a very short introduction presentation, 5 minutes, and then we can have a little bit of like a 30-minute discussion with them, and hopefully having 5 minutes for opening questions to the audience. So without further ado, I will first introduce Chloe Sidney from the Mixed Migration Center. She's the Global 4MI and Data Coordinator, and she'll be talking about innovation and data for children on the move. So the floor is yours, Chloe.
Yeah. Thanks, Manuel. I hope you've all been enjoying the pastries as much as I have. It's great to see everyone again on the third day. I think I've met a few of you already. Most of you probably already know the Mixed Migration Center. For those of you who don't, we're a global network engaged in data collection, research, analysis, policy and programmatic development focused on mixed migration, which we understand as cross-border movements of people, so refugees, victims of trafficking, people looking for better lives and opportunities, who have so different legal statuses, different vulnerabilities, but are moving along the similar routes using similar means of travel, and often irregularly and often with support from smugglers as well. Let's see if I can figure out how this works. What do we do? Aha. So 4MI is our flagship project. It is essentially a globally comparable primary quantitative data collection exercise. So we're collecting this comparable quantitative survey data on mixed migration, which you can all tap into, and I'll show you how a little bit later. So the way we collect this data is through our network of around 165 enumerators, who are often migrants and refugees themselves and embedded within the communities, who are conducting individual interviews with people on the move in around 20 countries on a continuous basis across migration routes. So every year we're able to collect around 15,000 interviews, and so far our database has got around 75,000 interviews that you can look into and analyze. Now, we use one core standardized survey, which is why it's globally comparable, but we also have some additional modules tailored for specific themes. And obviously, spoiler, there's one on caregivers and youth as well that I'll talk about a little bit later. I have to mention the limitations, obviously. People on the move, extremely difficult to get a sampling frame. So we're using a combination of purposive sampling and snowball sampling, which means that technically the findings are not representative, but given the volume of data we're collecting, it's very indicative of mixed migration trends. Just to give you a little insight into our focus, I know you can't really see what's going on there, but basically we're everywhere along all the key migration routes globally. We have a team in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have a team in West and North Africa. Aurelia's sitting over there. We have a team in East and Southern Africa, a team in Asia, and a team in Europe. And something that's key here is that we're not present in all of the countries along the routes, but we are collecting data on these countries because our survey is asking questions about places people stop and the dangerous locations that they go through. So we're able to capture information on the whole route essentially through the survey. Now, children, we've touched upon this a lot, understandably, in the past couple of days. We collect data on children, but not with children at the moment. So far, we focused on people age 18 and above. But we are asking questions, even in our core survey, about children, and I'll show you a couple in a minute. But to complement this core survey, we also have a module. So as I mentioned, we have a caregivers and youth module, which we've implemented in 13 countries. And just to give you a little overview, so we've actually been able to speak to 6,200 caregivers, more or less, across these different countries. And these caregivers actually represent 11,700 children, based on the data that we've collected. We haven't analyzed the data from South America yet because it's just been finalized. But looking at the other countries on the screen, so the ones not in IDAC, with around 5,500 caregivers, 13% of them had children born en route or at the location where we interviewed them. And 18% said they would have chosen a different route if they hadn't been traveling with children. So just a little taster into some of the data our module can provide. Going back to our core data, I mentioned it was easy to access. 4MI Interactive is a freely accessible dashboard, which we update every quarter with our data. So at the moment, it's got around 75,000 interviews on it. You can play around with the data. There's some filters, filter by country of interview, country of nationality, gender, for example. There we go, some data on children that's available on our dashboard. So of all the people we've interviewed, around 27% were traveling with children. And for those, the main risks that they considered the children traveling with them had been exposed to were physical violence, kidnapping, and death, among others. And not to be taken lightly because you can see, or possibly not, depending on how small it is on the screen, but close to half of those said that they were very highly exposed to these risks. So don't hesitate to tap into this information on our dashboard. If you need more than what's available on 4MI Interactive, you can also reach out because we do share our data if you justify why you want to use it. So it's a resource, it's there to be used. And of course, we also do publications based on this data. These are a few. I did print a couple of flyers with QR codes on the first day, so you may have seen some of these already. Our latest was actually from our West and North Africa team, looking at economic integration of young migrants. We have lots of others, migration experiences of youth in Honduras, profiles of youth in Sudan, and also some key messages on children and youth in general. So don't hesitate to tap into this resource. The fact that it is comparable does provide a good value added for analysis. So there we go. I'm sure Manuel will have lots of questions and potentially you too. So don't hesitate to come back if you want to know more.
Thank you so much, Chloe, and thanks for keeping the time at exactly 5 minutes. So next, please help me welcome also Fausto Spiga, who's the protection assessment specialist from the Impact Initiatives, who will be talking about the importance of context and methodological awareness in machine learning for humanitarian action. So with that, Fausto, floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. So today I would like to give you a very brief overview of two research projects that are taking place right now at Impact. Both of them are related to child protection and in particular child separation in context of displacement. So let me start with the first one. So this is a result of a collaboration we had with UNICEF. And the goal of this project was to better understand child separation, and in particular, those cases that require family tracing and reunification across refugees, IDPs, and host communities. And as part of this project, a very small part, consisted of using this machine learning approach to try to identify which variables could help us predict these cases where family tracing and reunifications are needed. Let me give you a very small overview of the methodology. I'm happy to take questions afterwards. But basically, we start by doing a systematic analysis of MSN8 databases across 41 contexts in 19 countries from 2021 to 2023. So this represents overall over more than 300,000 observations, household surveys. Why we decide to use this approach of machine learning? First, for the enhanced capacity to make predictions that this methodology proposed, but also in particular because one of the challenges we have is that these cases where family tracing and reunification is needed is what is considered usually a rare case. So the prevalence or the percentage of households where this happens is very low. So we were able to use this specific algorithm that machine learning offered that is called anomaly detection to train this model and try to identify which variables have this predictive variable. How the model perform? Compared to random guessing, it performs relatively well. Of course, it's not perfect, and this is something we were expecting because many variables that are considered drivers of child separations are not part of a household survey. But it helped us predict or identify actually which variables may have a predictive power in terms of family separation. So this is very important. Now, the second research I would like to briefly mention is a very different one in terms of methodology. So the goal of this objective of this research was to evaluate the impact of migration dynamics on child protection and caregiving dynamics in the Colombia-Venezuela border. This was a qualitative assessment where we use child participation. I know this methodology is not very innovative, although it was for us at Impact. But what I want to mention about this project that was taking place at the same time was that when doing the secondary data review before data collection, there was one fact, actually a couple of facts, but I would like to mention one that make us reflect a little bit on the scope of our machine learning prediction. It was that a considerable proportion of migrants in Venezuela were leaving their children behind, and in many cases without the care of any adult. So this raised a critical question. That was, are we capturing actually in our machine learning model this child-led household? And the answer was no. And we start reflect a little bit more, and we realize that it was not only child household that we were missing, but also these elusive samples were not neither children nor parents are present in a physical household. So what were the implications for our machine learning model? Well, first of all, we ask ourselves, how do these exclusion impact the accuracy of our predictions? Well, if we are clear about what is the scope of our sample, then there is no problem. But we always need to be very careful when presenting results to be clear about who we are talking about. And the second question was, can we adapt data collection to include more diverse household scenario? And the answer is yes and no. We can improve data collection to identify households that are led by children, but we are gonna always face a problem of elusive sample in this kind of methodologies. A key takeaway from this that I think this is not very new for many of you, but we think it's always important to keep in mind is that machine learning is a tool, not a standalone solution, and its power is amplified when paired with qualitative insights. Many thanks for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Fausto. That's an amazing set of examples. So I'll give the voice to the next speaker, which is Apostolos Kasapisa, Director of the President's Office of the Hellenic Statistical Authority, who will be talking about leaving no one behind, the digital 2021 population housing census in Greece. Apostolos.
Thank you very much, Manuel. Hello to all of you. Good morning. Always hard to be in the last day, almost ending during the morning, but it's okay. So I'm sure that you are all wondering how a census, which is the most traditional and boring statistical work we all statistical office had to do, could be innovative, and more of that, how can we make the census digital? But let's see how we manage to do that. If I manage to, yes.
Big green one.
The big green. Oh, the big green. That's the green one. So the 2021 census was coincided with the Greek Revolution, so we didn't have any chance to skip it, as you can imagine, because it was part of our celebrations. So we had to figure out, even though there was a COVID cases, that we had to make this census done. So, and be aware that the Greek census was a traditional one. Traditional census means that we have to reach the entire population. There is closed door-to-door method, and then, even though we had to be sure that we had to use more technological advanced methods in order to catch the whole population. And also this census has a geospatial dimension, providing information that links population characteristics to their precise geographic destination. And of course, in order to do that, you need a strong legal statistical framework, and that was the statistical framework that we had to use. So how this census was done, and how we managed to call this census a digital census, the first digital census in Greece. We had 4 phases. Of course, the first was a preparatory phase, the building census. In the first phase, there was electronic self-enumeration. The enumerators had to visit your household and provided you with the sealed envelope with the code. This code was assigned to your household and only your household. That representative of your household had to use this code and his government codes, digital government codes, in order to enumerate his whole household. In the first phase, almost the 70% of the population managed to be enumerated. In the second phase, for those who weren't familiar with the technology or they didn't have PCs or whatever, there was a traditional interview with the enumerator. In the phase 3, as you can see, the first in the phase A and phase B, you had to be contacted with the numerator. In phase 3, if you didn't manage to be contacted by your numerator, okay, it was totally fully electronic self-enumeration procedure. The pioneering thing about this population census was the fact that we had 2 keys in order to connect the census data with all administrative records in Greece: the tax identification number, the social security number. In order to collect that, we were sure that we were able to do that, so that's why we needed a strong legal framework. This was dual, because we wanted, first of all, to check the quality and, of course, to establish a statistical population register for Greece. We collected the data, we had integrated automatic controls in the questionnaire that was very helpful for the final procedure of the census. So we used also the administrative resources, but what was the idea? The idea was we shouldn't leave anyone behind. So for those communities who were very hard to reach to find them, we had to be sure that we will be able to find them. So, for example, children. We all know that children, of course, they are part of the census, but they're not provided as their data. So even though for children that were in special facilities, we managed to have special enumerators to find them. That's why, and by using administrative data, we managed to find those children that their parents forgot to enumerate them, for example, for some weird reason. Apart from that, in collaboration with UNICEF, we have a special publication regarding children from the census. I have one copy in Greek, but you can find digitally the same copy in English in our website. Refugees, we had special enumerators in refugee camps, and we were able to reach them at all. That was very easy, and that was very good for us because, as you know, the census provide us the sample frames. So it means that now we are able to include the refugees in our sample frames during our next statistical works. Also the same with Roma population. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Apostolos. And next, please join me in welcoming Viviana Cañón. She's Program Specialist and Global Coordinator of the UNICEF Frontier Data Network, and she will be speaking about estimating migration using frontier data technologies, a case study on migration from Venezuela and Ukraine. Viviana, please.
Thank you, Manuel. Yes, I would like to take you from Venezuela migration, massive migration in 2018 to Ukraine in 2022. This is an example in which we have learned lots of things, our team, and we want to share with you these learnings with you today. So in 2018, there was a massive migration from Venezuela to the whole continent. We knew at that time that was something around 3 million people, but the main question from country offices at UNICEF, but also governments, was really where do they go when they cross the border, right? So are they going to Colombia or the US or where they are, and how many are they? So to answer that question, of course, governments had different systems in place, but they are very official, and for migrants it's complex sometimes to register. They don't know if it's a good idea, and then the numbers are not really easy to get. So at that time, we decided to do like an internal collaboration at UNICEF. It was something like headquarters has the capacity, the access to data from Facebook at that time, and also some connections with academia. So perhaps we can do something to estimate numbers, first in Colombia, but then in other countries in the region. And the approach was really to use one tool Facebook has still has today for advertisers to reach estimates. So when you do a campaign and you want to know, how many people will see your campaign, the ages and the specific places, you can do this through advertising tools through Facebook. So our approach was, let's do something similar, but just to estimate numbers for us in the humanitarian space. And then with that, we can have a more real-time data on the situation. And then the map you see there is the one that is in the right is from data from the government at the time, and the other one at the left is data from Facebook. So in many cases, it's very similar, and in other examples, you don't have data. For example, the gray part in the map there, but it was super useful for the people who were at the country office in the way you could anticipate things you were not sure about it, regions, because the other feature of this tool is that you can go as with many details in the specific areas of the country you don't know. So it was really interesting for that. So from this information we knew, Colombia was receiving almost 1 million of migrants from Venezuela at this specific year, and then the other countries were Peru, Chile, and the US. And we were able to do global analysis for each of the countries, but also from specific cities, population difference, and also some things related to gender, ages, and all of that. More information about this is in the paper I put over there. And one thing I wanted to highlight here is we fail to use these insights in a way at UNICEF, but also for the government, because of course we're talking about metadata. So this is also something we spoke yesterday in some of the tables, and it is interesting even today to see why this is happening. So of course we still have challenges, and I want to talk about that in the next slide. So the challenges I will cover later, just to tell you that this example that we use in Venezuela and Latin America was used also for Ukraine in 2022. So the models used for Venezuela that were created for Venezuela were used for Ukraine, but together with other data. So metadata was only one component of the final results. And then the idea was just to provide insights to humanitarian actors and in the field, just to understand, where are the schools, for example, where are infrastructure, and then where are people, and all of that. The difference also in this example is in the example from Venezuela, we didn't really have access to the numbers of children. So we knew migrants, but of course data from Meta, for you to have an account in Facebook, you need to be 13 years old. So in this case, it was, it was difficult to know, how many of them are children. So in the example of Ukraine, what we have tried is just to understand, for historical data, fertility rates in Ukraine, how many women can have children and how many, and them trying to understand and put that in the map. So it was used from the example we had before. But the challenges from the two examples are, again, today, access to metadata is not easy and not possible today, for example. And it was possible before, but we were lucky. Data bias, of course, we know children are not represented in the data all the times. Ages, and then for using these models we create in the past, we need also data collection approaches that can go with that. And with this, I just wanted to let you know that we have learned a lot from these two experiences, and we say, there's no way UNICEF can do this alone. So we need to have a different approach that allow us to work together with other partners that are key. I mean, that scientific communities and also data tech communities are very far away from humanitarian. So how can we bridge to help bridge a way for these communities to approach to our communities and support what we do? So the idea is also, empowering communities with data, so data access, technology, and also making sure, everyone is that is supporting humanitarian migration in this case can be involved in this conversation. So at the end we have an input that we can use it. So this is all about the frontier data tech network that we have created with the spirit to use this and connect with other communities like IDAC. Thank you.
Thanks, Viviana. And I'm probably not the only one that is confused by Facebook changing their name to Meta and then referring to metadata. So we don't, Facebook data. So last but not least, let me welcome William Lowe. He's the program lead on digital solutions from Save the Children, and he'll be talking about the predictive displacement project.
Sorry, it's a little strange. Morning. So yeah, predictive displacement is one of Save the Children's more innovative projects in the migration displacement space. So really what we are trying to do is respond to exponentially increasing amounts of displacement with less and less funding. And one of the ways we can get better at doing that is through the anticipatory action agenda. So being more efficient, early warning systems, and so forth. And this project is really part of that. So the idea being, can we take these predictive technologies that are now really pretty commonplace in other sectors and apply them to the displacement problem space? If we can predict how many people will be displaced, how many of them are children or other, groups of interest, and then really key where they'll be displaced to, where we would expect to see those arrivals and when. That puts us in a really strong position to be in the right place at the right time with the right type of interventions. But there are some pretty significant challenges to delivering this kind of work in this space. So particularly traditional machine learning models, very reliant on large quantities of historical data to train them. In this sector, we don't really have the luxury of really high quality quantitative data stretching back, far enough. It's inconsistent. The methodologies have changed over the years. Particularly the countries we're most interested in are the places that are least likely to have the data we're after. Those classic machine learning models, the existing pieces of work in the sector, they often tend to be pretty big picture. They don't have much subnational or kind of real operational outputs that our country offices could use. And then also Save the Children's data science capacity is pretty limited, which probably isn't a huge surprise. This is not our bread and butter. And so we're always trying to build this, we're always trying to build our own capacity at the same time as building an actual product. So to help deal with that problem of capacity, we really rely on partnerships. Highlighted a couple here for the two types of models we employ. So University of Virginia in the US, University of Brunel in the UK. Those university relationships have been really, really helpful, really, really productive. And as for our technical solution, so what we've introduced is a two-stage model. So we do use the machine learning approaches that we'll see kind of more commonplace. But we also brought in agent-based models, which are a really interesting, much less trodden path. Obviously don't have the time and space here to go into the kind of technical detail of that, but essentially one of the advantages of agent-based models is that they are not as reliant on large-scale quantitative data. You can bring in insights from qualitative data, from reports, and they can help you shape your model and start to build rules about how people will behave in it. So it's a really, really good technology to try and make work in this space where we don't have that kind of quant data, but we have enough reports and expert insights to fill this room. Our technical solution, we pull in external data on conflicts, their scale, the number of fatalities involved, the actors. We pass that to our first stage model, which predicts how many people we think we're going to see displaced. The second stage model predicts where we think they'll move to. They help us track them through that process. And then we pass those outputs to our country offices to help plan their work. We are live in Nigeria. We've had a deeply embedded pilot there We are at the moment working towards deploying for the north of Mozambique for Cabo Delgado, similar kind of chronic conflict displacement. And we've recently started work on Ukraine. Each time we move to a new context, we try and experiment with something extra to new functionality or new data. So with Ukraine, it's new signal data sources, stuff like Google Trends, social media. Is there some benefit that these can have for these kind of approaches? With Mozambique, we're looking to move towards a much more complex geographic network. You can see the one on the left. This is northeast Nigeria. It's road-based. They're not. Those links don't necessarily reflect individual roads, but more connectivity between settlements. But the grid on the right, this is for Mozambique. You can see it's much more detailed. This allows much more organic movement, has greater fidelity to how perhaps people are moving around. Roads and things that speed up connectivity are still present. You can see the lighter yellow lines. But yeah, we're hoping this will allow us to represent movement in a much more accurate and yeah, greater fidelity. It is a lot more difficult. It's a much heavier model to run. And so there are always challenges there around the technical side. Next steps, really, it's these next steps are kind of project-based. So yeah, looking to scale to new contexts. We are overwhelmingly conflict focused still, though we increasingly do have climate factors in, but really we want to be also predicting climate displacement in a kind of with a similar approach. And also we've been pretty risk averse about sharing our work externally, just for protection questions. But we really want to get it out there. We want it to be a wider resource and just, really push the use of models like this and these technologies, particularly the agent-based work, for this kind of anticipatory action planning. But we still have some of the same challenges or new challenges. So what's really helpful is when we have quantitative data and qualitative data that speak to each other. So we can see large-scale emergent patterns in quant data, but having qualitative data that helps us explain why those patterns are occurring, incredibly useful for these kind of rich models. We still need the technical and digital expertise. It's not just data scientists. In some ways, that's actually easier to find. We know the name of it. We know how to find it now. But other stuff like where do we host these models long term, like user interfaces, this stuff that's trickier still. And then funding. Funding that is tolerant of experimentation, of not knowing exactly what the end product's going to look like and following us as we pivot through it. So yeah, not just for this kind of scale stage, but for the ability to experiment. Okay.
Thank you so much, Will. So I know we have like 30 minutes, but I would love to leave some space at the end for some questions if you have in the audience. But I would like to go through you quickly through a couple of themes, at least, that I think have emerged in this diverse set of thinking out of the box. I mean, they're so diverse, from new data streams like Facebook to machine learning and AI to how do you utilize census to how do you think differently on asking questions on a snowballing effect and things so. But across all these things, I see that challenge of representativity. I think, Chloe, you've been the first one to say, well, even if you are asking with surveys and more classic methods, when you're talking about migrant populations, you really don't know what's the denominator. So you don't really know how representative is your data. So first, I would like to ask you, how much of a problem do you think that is, or how much of a problem has that been in order to put that data for action? What do you think can go next in making that sort of data representativity issue be solved? What communities or techniques do you see in incorporating there?
Thanks, Manuel. Well, as you mentioned, we all know it's very difficult to get a sampling frame for people on the move. We just don't know how many people there are. I think there is a lot of sort of goodwill and understanding among everyone who works on migration. We all know that it's difficult to get representative data. And for 4MI, because of the scale of the data collection, we are still able to provide good insights, even if it's not representative. That being said, of course, we would all love to have representative data. So we are exploring different ways forwards. And something that I've been exploring recently, I'm not committing to it, is respondent-driven sampling. You may have heard about it. It's basically snowball sampling on steroids. The idea is to approximate probability sampling by collecting more information on networks. So asking notably people how many people they know that meet the eligibility criteria, and then tracking networks through the use of coupons with unique identifiers. So basically linking the respondent to the person who recruited them and so on throughout the waves of sampling. And the idea is that through some clever statistical method that I confess I don't understand, which requires the use of software, you're able to then basically map this network and approximate probability sampling. It gives weight to different respondents basically based on the networks. So we're exploring this. It's been designed to access hard to reach populations. It was designed, I think, for research on HIV in particular. We think it has a lot of potential for sort of one-off projects, notably where we might be able to, for example, reach, say, Haitian migrants in Latin America. We were vaguely thinking about the possibility of using this method. We could use it in cities, notably, where we're trying to access people that might be harder to reach. But we are also exploring whether this could potentially be an option moving forwards for MI. So we're going to be experimenting with it. We're trying to find the first project to test it on. If any of you have ever done RDS, I'd love to hear your insights, because it's new to us. We're learning, and to be determined whether or not it will be successful or not, but maybe. And if it's not, then our data's still great. So please do use it.
That's awesome. Actually, you're mentioning network science, and network science actually transformed the way we look at information in the internet. Google revolutionized the world of information sharing by applying network science, and advertising also influenced that community. So really interesting to see how can we mobilize that community towards more migration problems. Fausto, that's kind of a joint question to both of you, because you're trying to apply machine learning. Fausto, you've been linking those two places, right? Like you're saying that sort of representativity problem has been a problem for my machine learning approach, but when I'm looking into these other more traditional space, I can kind of measure how big is that hole in there. How do you see that representative issue on the data be an additional issue on the machine learning approach? Like how does that error accumulate or not? And how does also is a machine learning outcome, is that understood by users, or is there an additional line of work that has to be done there? Does it feel like a black box? And maybe the number is very, robust, but do you have extra challenges on explaining how that represents the actual outcome? So I don't know who wants to start first. Fausto, maybe, if you want.
Yes, there is. Oh, no, indeed, it's a very good question, because basically what the machine learning does is use the data you have to train the model to make some predictions. So the point is the population that we are missing having the same characteristics? So we don't know. We have a sense, an idea, but we cannot quantify that bias. So of course, at the end, we can only make prediction or be sure of the prediction only about the population we are capturing with the data. We can understand through qualitative assessment whether the conditions of the children we are missing are similar or not. But in terms of how to adjust the model, we don't know how to do it, because we don't have that in a quantified way. So I see there are limitations that so far we haven't been able to solve. So at the moment, what we try to do is to be very aware of the limitations we have and transparent, and say, this is only useful for this small set or a subset of children separated. So we have to be very careful also when communicating this result, because this might lead to actually wrong conclusions, or not wrong, but that actually apply to a particular subset. And actually, at the moment, we don't have the magnitude of the elusive sampling. We don't know how many children are being separated and are not being captured in any way or could be captured in any way by quantitative methods. So it's a challenge we have right now that I don't have an answer, unfortunately. But I think the first step is to be aware, try to always reflect on what is your sample, what is the sample you are not capturing, and what are the characteristics of this sample, and approximate it or try to understand what are the problems through other methods.
Additional transparency and pre-analysis of the data. Will, any further thoughts on that machine learning space? Oh, you have one.
Hello. Hi. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we're always going to be like in this sector, you know, I mentioned the data, which is what I'm going to come back to here, that we're always going to be a little bit one step behind because the data quality we're working with is not being created through some perfect process that you're going to get in other sectors. You know, someone like, it's a ridiculous overstretched example, but Amazon, who are generating their own perfect sales data, and that's what they've got to work with. We are inevitably relying on messier data. And so the techniques that we apply, the approaches we take, and the partnerships we build to do that need to be really defined by the limitations we're operating. And there's huge opportunities for this to apply data science to it. But I think we need to be really smart that the difference between us and other sectors is that a key part of the framing of our approach to it has to be the limitations of the data we have available to us. That's all.
That's great. So given that Viviana is next to you, I'll put that question to you because you've actually been talking about Facebook data or metadata, as they call it right now. And what you also mentioned, this is not representative. If you're under 13, you can't officially have an account, which means that if you're under 13 and you have an account, you're going to be saying I'm over 13. So first thing, you need to have that account and so on. How was that an extra challenge with also in working with governments, right? Like, is there an additional level of trust that has to go in there? Is triangulation the way to go? What are your thoughts on how to incorporate these type of techniques into pipelines of data value, and in what situations? You mentioned Ukraine, for example, is a place where maybe comparability and soundness is not that important. It's more important to have that immediate intelligence to act on it. What have you seen in that space for these novel data sources?
Yeah, thank you, Manuel. Yes, and we have learned a lot. I mean, in the case of Venezuela, of course, the government and also the UNICEF country office, they decided not to use the data from Facebook, and it was because of trust, even if the numbers were not too bad at that time. But I think this component of trust was something we try to address for Ukraine by saying the Facebook or the metadata is not the only source we have, so let's use other data we have, and then we have a picture of the situation that is more trustable, let's say. So I will say, but how can we address this children component in the data is, by using different types of data and combining all of them. And then I will say also, again, connecting with this science or tech networks that the humanitarian development work is not connected. I mean, if what we did for Facebook with Facebook data was also with academia and expertise. So and at the end, there was even a paper. I mean, we are not saying this is just some people who enjoy playing with the data of Meta. So I think we need just to push for that, for keep, working together with the people who knows how to use this data and the limitations to address this children component, and then trying to use all that is available in a collaborative way, I will say.
Thank you, Viviana. And finally, Apostolos, I think you're kind of like that perfect example as you're incorporating that digitalization into the census, which is by definition the most robust data you can have. You were seeing all the value that it comes out. You've been mentioning that sort of I have dynamic data and so on. But then you yourself have been mentioning, well, as we digitalize these, there are some communities that we know might not take benefit on that, and the different approach you are taking on this. How do you see these incorporating faster data technologies like Viviana is talking about at Facebook can work together with not leaving anyone behind in there? And can that be the missing link to people like Faustos and Will that are trying to apply machine learning, and they need that richness of more robust data sets in the back? Any thoughts on that?
Thank you, Manuel. As you said, in theory, the census, by definition, has to be fully representative since we are providing data for the whole population. That's why before we had the census in Greece, we had a very scrutinized data assessment regarding how we are going to move on. For example, why we chose to perform a traditional census, the traditional door-to-door census. That was by choice. First of all, because we were sure that not all the population in Greece were in registers. We had many refugees in Greece over 12 months period in Greece, so they are considered permanent residents in Greece. And on the other half, we had many Greeks who were during the crisis abandoned Greece as refugees, or not as refugees, as migrants. So that wasn't the case. We couldn't perform the census through registers, as many Northern European friends are doing this. On the other half, or the other part, we had to be sure that we could reach the whole population. But even we did anything we could in order to have data for all hard-to-reach populations, for example, migrants, refugees, Roma population, and things like that, many things were absent. For example, many characteristics of the population where you have to where their characteristics are considered sensitive. Bear in mind that the census is not the most appropriate way to collect data regarding sensitive information. And whereas when we are talking about sensitive personal information, personal data, we mean information regarding health, regarding sexual orientation, and things like that. So there was a lack in our data regarding people with disabilities. So how did we manage to handle this? We handled this by having these two or more keys who were able to be linked with other registers from public administration. At the same time, the future now in Europe is that we want to exploit, allow me to say, the privately held data. That's a very crucial part. If we are able to exploit these privately held data, means that we were able to link and have data regarding many other disaggregated categories of population. That was our idea. Thank you.
Yeah, that's amazing. Actually, that brings another issue on trust, right? Because as we were saying before, on how to make governments work with parts of data, and then when governments use this wealth of data, how the trust of the populations, that's also really key. Because I want to leave some room for some questions on the audience. I'm going to ask one question to all of you, and you can come together. Each one of you has been thinking out of the box in a different way on how to apply technologies, how to apply new data sets, how to digitalize things. What does it take to do this out of the box thinking? What do you think is the biggest challenge, the greatest weakness in terms of resourcing, talent acquisition, talent retention, know-how? That's kind of the question. And what's the biggest step we can take forward? If you could just do one thing to solve your problems, what would that be, and what can we do as a community to try to get there? You want to start?
Sure.
I think, as Will mentioned, funding is always a big one, flexible funding in particular. Our team in Latin America had a little bit of flexible funding they've been able to use for social media listening. So they're using AI to tap into social media to get insights, for example, into information needs of people on the move, the discourse of host and migrant populations in Argentina and Uruguay. And they're able to do that because they have the funding and the capacity to take a step back and explore different opportunities to analyze data and to capture data in different ways. So I think that's very important. And I think it also gives us the opportunity to think beyond projects. For example, if we had funding just for 4MI as a whole, rather than project-based funding, it would give us the opportunity to identify where the gaps might lie, where we might want to position ourselves to collect data, rather than being necessarily project-focused, which might limit us to specific countries or specific nationalities. So I think, yeah, big ask for any donors would be flexible funding. Anyone else? Alistair?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think we are all going to agree that funding is an issue. In particular, at least in the case of the humanitarian sector, long-term funding. And I think, at least again, in the humanitarian sector, we're usually focused on the day-to-day, trying to solve data gaps that we have to make a response to a crisis. So it's usually thinking about what is a data gap that we have to respond tomorrow. So there is a lack of long-term vision, I will say. So for sure, long-term funding will be of great help. Additionally to this, I think we have a problem with retaining talent. Again, this is in part the nature of our sector. We have people moving from one mission to another, but also there is a lot of turnover, at least in the NGOs. That's the reality. So it's not a matter of hiring a data specialist, because you need to understand what is the data ecosystem where you are working, the particularities of the humanitarian sector, the particularities of the methodologies you are using. It takes a lot of time. So usually when you have a person that is well qualified to do this, it might take 1 year in some cases to really grasp and understand what is the ecosystem where you are working. And then that person probably find another position in another organization with a better salary. So it's a huge problem that we have in terms of retaining that skill that is quite scarce in, at least in NGOs, in the humanitarian sector.
By my side, I have to say that people's fear is a very big obstacle regarding this. But when I'm saying people's fear, I mean not only outside of the statistical office, but also inside the statistical office. When we first decided to perform this form of census, the new digital census, the majority of the people were afraid. My people were afraid that, are you sure it's hazardous? People won't trust us. People will be hesitant to answer. People won't answer via this because they're used to do the census with the previous way, the old traditional way. That the fear and the fear to the new, the fear to the change, that's a very important part. We can tackle it regarding the general population. We have the statistical literacy programs and things like that. But in things that have to do with data, new technologies, and people, fear is one big element that keeps you back most of the time. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll add to that, you know, out of the resources, I think the lack collaboration we have, I mean, internally. So to do like a data, a memorandum of understanding with a data provider, and then you need to work with legal and that you need to work with another programmatic area of UNICEF. So it's very difficult for us to collaborate internally, but also with others. And I agree with you. This is also something we need to talk about it. On the resource part, I think talent. We have learned many things about talent. So having the right talent, data scientists in our team, for example, it has been a luxury sometimes for the organization point of view, but also we have learned how to do partnerships with academia and universities and leading experts that are just there and trying to help when needed. So when you have like a humanitarian emergency sometimes is like, you know, we are lucky because they're available and ready to help. And then we need to work in other options for them to make this more formal in a way. And then data access, of course, you have the funding, you have the talent, you have the technology, but you don't have the data. What is what you are going to do? I mean, and then technology, we, like some years ago, were thinking a lot about, you know, this is tech. We need just to focus on tech. And then you didn't have the talent. You didn't have the programmatic areas convinced about it. So I think it's a combination of things, and we cannot say it's only funding. I think it's a combination of the four of them, and a way UNICEF is trying to address this issue is really thinking about this network approach, the community we can internally, but also externally, the community we can build to be able to address these questions and problems together.
I think I'd echo that recruiting data scientists, hanging on to them, let alone the right kind of data scientists that it turned out you needed, is really difficult. And it is another reason that these external partnerships, long-term relationships with universities has been really, really useful. Not only because it allows us to externalize some of that capacity need, and that persists through any kind of handover, but also part of the joy of working with these universities is a similar outlook. There's a similar sense of experimentation. Our goals and how we frame those goals is more similar than other types of partnerships. But also the diversity of the type of support we can access through them. So by and large, that's just access to technical experts, you know, doing their own research. But equally, sometimes we'll pull in PhDs from other adjacent sectors. We'll do keystone projects with more senior students to solve specific problems. We've done hackathons where we had we were looking for a new creative approach. Sometimes we just have a load of data that needs crunching or exploring or being found, and so we'll get a load of undergrads in, and they'll work in a team to do that. And so there's a real enjoyable flexibility to the type of support we get from them, and the kind of ways we can deploy them that has been really useful in a space where it's always a little unpredictable what the next thing we need to do is. And so I can't praise those relationships enough. They've been incredibly beneficial.
That's great. I mean, I've taken some notes here, and I think part of the objective of the working group, actually, of innovation of IDAC can go a little bit in this direction on how, you've been talking about risk taking, you've been talking about collaboration engines, how talent attraction and retention, and to what extent can we all think differently about who we are in there and what we can do. I don't know if there is room for one more question. I don't know if anybody wants to ask a question to the panel in here. See one over there. Is there a microphone over there, or I can bring this one otherwise?
Yeah, thank you, moderator, and thank you for the panelists for doing justice to this gray area. Of course, the working group 4, I must confess, your work is great because you are venturing into an area that is still gray. I want to ask just very few, and one has to close. Yeah. You talked about the digital sensors, but where I need clarification from you is where you talk about electronic self-enumeration. Please, can you elaborate more on that? What you mean by that? Then Viviana, that talk about the Facebook, yeah, and placing it side by side with the data coming from the statistical office. That they look, but I want to see if you can talk more on the standard deviation from the two. Where's the area of dispersion from that two data? Because I couldn't see it very well. Data coming from the Facebook and the statistical office, because we are trying to place the two side by side. Yeah. So is there any area of divergence from the two data, looking at the methodology used? Then, lastly.
No, but yes, those two questions, because otherwise they're not going to have time to answer it then. Okay. So Apóstoles, Viviana, those two go for you.
Thank you very much for the question, because I have now the time to explain to you how was the Greek census was performed, and without thinking of the time. So don't worry, Margaret. This census is considered the best practice regarding the collection of data, and we're still calling it digital census because, okay, the enumerator had to find your household, but nothing more. More than 70% of the households were enumerated digitally, means that they were able to use their codes and their government codes, of course, every Greek household has one, and enumerate them. So we are very happy because we managed to have more, for more than 70% of the population, ready to our database their characteristics. That's why we're calling it digital census. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to try to address your question, in the case of Colombia, the National Office of Statistics wasn't involved, so perhaps it's another mistake, because the government created an agency for migrants registration, so everything was just with this agency, and then we know, this agency got to know the insights from the publication.
And I think we have room for one more question.
Thank you very much. One question to Apóstoles. With regards to your census, I want to ask what I asked Morocco yesterday about coverage, and particularly in the aftermath of COVID-19, what were the issues of coverage or undercount within the Greek census, and particularly when coming down to smaller areas, were there issues about coverage? Furthermore, you mentioned that you asked questions on the tax number and social security number. How did that link up with the trust that we're speaking about, that people had? Were people hesitant of giving that information because they felt you could link it to other pieces of information? How did that work? And then just a short question, Viviana. It's Viviana, right? Besides the issue that Manuel raised about the under 15 age around Facebook data, of course, not everyone has Facebook. It's not a representative tool. What kind of corrections do you make to it to adjust for biases that you might see coming through the Facebook data? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Regarding the coverage, 99.9% of the households were covered, and we are very lucky about that. Regarding people's fear of provide their social security number or their tax identification number. First, we had a very strong legal framework, and second, we had this thing that we keep saying in statistical office: transparency. We were transparent. We explained to the people why you're using their data, and to be honest, we were lucky. We were lucky because in 2021 we keep forgetting COVID, but all the people were afraid of COVID, and because of the COVID, the majority of the people were used to provide these two codes to the other agencies regarding vaccination, regarding things like that. So it wasn't hard to them to, okay, just fill this variable also. It was okay. It was easy. And we were happy to have this variable in our census. Thank you.
Yeah, and then on your question, one of the things we always see with Facebook data is the penetration of the country, right? At that time, the penetration was really good. I mean, I don't know if today that numbers decrease because Facebook is for old people, not for children, they say. But you know, when you use this Facebook tool, you are able to ask questions for estimate your reach. So you can always ask questions regarding, you know, if you are a woman, if you know your behavior, things like that. That not of course, this is anonymized at the end, but you can always, you know, do this. And again, if you complement this with other data you have in place, you are able to address better this problem of bias and representativity.
That is metadata on penetration and connectivity.
Yeah.
We have room for one more question.
So basically a follow-up question, Viviana, for you on that, because I think this is really the elephant in the room. So certainly old people are not covered by Facebook. That's already one thing. And I'm not sure how you can adjust. I mean, when it's mostly young people migrating, that's fine. But in the case of Venezuela, this is families. And so it's probably more challenging. But particularly in the case of Ukraine, where Facebook is very little used. It's all Viber and Telegram and some other social media. I don't get it how you can, you know, recalibrate basically the estimation in that case. And I know that Meta has done some work for the EU at the beginning of the Ukrainian displacement, but again, taking into account the specificity of the penetration of Meta, I have very strong doubts there. A question for William regarding ABM model, because we're also working with Brunel and UNHCR on some agent-based models for Ukraine. And what I understand is that there are so many parameters in these models that the calibration is an issue. So how do you make sure that, particularly in crisis situation where there is instability in the behaviors and so on and so forth, you calibrate the model in a way that it gives meaningful results?
Yeah, I think your question is very relevant. This is what we had done for Ukraine, right? So the idea we used was just to, you know, take historical data about fertility rates in Ukraine, but it is historical data. So, you know, you always have this bias problem. And then trying to understand how many children by women can be, you know, in part of this migration path. And then again, trying to use other data sources, and that's why at the end it was used. But we haven't solved the problem. And we need more, you know, collaboration with, in Ukraine, we have different collaborators from the ones we have for Venezuela. And it was the way to get this, new approaches there, right? So I think this is also something we still need to work on, and then try to see even other sources, because sometimes access to data is not so easy, even today with Meta.
Just to actually build on Viviana's point there a bit, I don't know if anybody was at the IFMS in Santiago, but Meta presented there some methodology for filling in gaps in migration data based on metadata. And clearly there is some real impressive dark arts going on there about how they are able to estimate wider populations that surround a given number of Facebook users. So I think, yeah, probably within Meta, there are some interesting answers to be found as well. And then as for the agent-based model, yeah, absolutely. I think the two contexts that we're most interested in applying this stuff to are new crises, new content, new kind of humanitarian crisis contexts, where maybe the situation is to some degree unprecedented, and then chronic, long-term conflict-induced displacement scenarios, hence Northeast Nigeria, Cabo Delgado and Mozambique. That's where we've had the most success in applying these models, that second scenario, because there is a consistency of behavior over a long period of time where we're able to be just that little bit more confident in producing those rule sets than we are in the kind of brand new context. This is why Ukraine's an interesting new application for us. It's quite different conflict arrangement, but also the behavior patterns we're a little bit less certain about. So absolutely, we'll see. But certainly, yeah, where we've had the most success is where there is that longer history of systematic, chronic displacement.
And with that, thank you very much. Thanks you very much for your questions, and especially thank you very much to our panelists for giving all those different perspectives. So thanks a lot. Help me here say goodbye to them. Thank you. Thanks a lot.